All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, February 19th, and we are at the start of week 3. You have now finished out your Angry Bots game composition and sound design. We have a couple of submissions to the feedback and peer review that was made from last week to take a listen to today. That is our kind of main focus overall. This week, in week 3, we kind of shift over to more of the technical side of things. Now that we are halfway through the month, you have created all of the music and sound effects for both of your games, both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. You have the opportunity to continue working on the music and sound effects through the rest of the month as you get everything into the game and as you're testing all of the music and sound effects working together with the gameplay. Get a sense of how everything works together. You can make any of those changes all the way till week 4. But now here, kind of halfway through the month, we are taking it from the point of view similar to halfway through the project, or at some point, your pile of music that you've been creating and generating for a brand new game that you're working on will eventually start making its way into the actual game, being tested out, getting a sense of how it's going to play back and how it is going to interact with the player. And so you will start putting more and more into the game. There's a list of to-dos ultimately that you need to fill, a list of tasks, and so one by one that music goes into the game and you test it out and you make changes to the music, make changes to the sound effects, you put it back in the game, and in a professional sense this is a very common kind of iteration that you go through, and this is what we're going to work on this week, is actually getting your music and sound effects set up. So we are going to be using a piece of software known as Wise, W-W-I-S-E, and it is made by a company called Audio Kinetic. They are based out of Canada, and we are going to, the assignments and the videos and the materials and the archive is going to lead you through the process of getting everything set up, making sure that it works and plays back properly. I want to go through a couple of steps. I want to make sure that you are downloading the piece of software correctly, getting access to it. I always want to go through it in the live class to make sure nothing's changed and that you're getting the correct version and you get everything set up. And as you go through the materials through this week, if you have any sort of questions or running into any sort of issues, please reach out to me. This is a good week to get ahead of everything, run into any technical issues, send me screenshots if you come across errors, send me any screenshots or errors or crashes or anything that happens that you encounter if there's anything wrong. Most people go through the process technically no problem, but every once in a while some people run into technical issues. I don't want any of the technical side to get in the way of the creativity and you successfully completing the project. So make sure you get ahead of the project and you start running into any issues, if you're going to, as early as you can, so that you can send me an email and we can troubleshoot and work through anything. So I'm going to show you the software that we are working with this week. It's a piece of software called Audio Kinetic. No, it's called Wise. It's created by a company called Audio Kinetic. They are an industry standard tool to connect audio into a game, what is typically known as a game audio middleware tool. So in order for your audio to work in a game, there exists this tool that sort of bridges the gap between you and the code. So early in the dawn of game audio and games in general, you had to have either somebody who knew how to program, who also knew how to make music, or a composer or a musician and a programmer had to work very, very closely to make sure all of the technical side was taken care of. Well, the tools over time have been built to kind of bridge this process. It is typically what is known as a middleware tool. It's a piece of software that gets in the middle between you and the code. It is a piece of software that somewhat feels and looks like a DAW software, a audio creation tool, where all of the music and sound effects are still created in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever your favorite DAW is. This is going to allow you to put the music in and determine how the music's going to play back, when it's going to play, what happens in the game that makes it play. Is it going to loop? Is it going to play along with anything else in the game? How does it mix along with all of the other sounds? It allows you to combine the music and sound effects together in the final package that ultimately gets hooked up to the game. So, in order to download the software, you go to audiokinetic.com. There's a button over here that says Get Wise and allows you to download it. Let me actually do this before we go away from this page. There's another page on here called Powered by Wise. This lists all of the games that are using Wise, and this is really why we utilize Wise, why we talk about it. A lot of job postings, lots of game audio opportunities out there. We'll talk about some of the tools we'll use this month. All of our games are built in the Unity game engine. We'll also talk about the Unreal game engine. We use Wise. We'll also talk about another tool called Fmod. But a lot of these games out here are very, very popular titles, and they are all using this tool. So understanding the process of how your music actually works in the game and how everything is hooked up and connected is certainly a kind of the next level of understanding what's going on with everything. So this is why we use Wise. I'm going to go ahead and hit download Wise here. There's a big blue button that will allow you to download the Wise launcher. That's the main piece of software that you'll download from their website, and it will give you access to the software that we're using. So I already have this loaded up. Wise launcher. So make sure you download the launcher first, and it will have you create a username and password, and it will allow you to download the correct piece of software. So we are using a 2016 version for all of our projects, and is plastered up all over the assignments and the videos to make sure you are downloading the correct version. It will not work in a 2017 or 2018 or 2019 version. Nothing, for the purposes of what we're doing in the software, nothing has changed with any of these updates. And this is the version that works with our particular Unity projects. And, well, it's not allowing me to download the version. So just the main thing that I want to point out is that you are downloading the correct version of the software. Make sure that you have the 2016 version. There's some other interesting things once you have gone through the project, and you might want to dig around a bit more. There's a samples tab that has projects for the Unreal Engine. This Wise Adventure game is a really great tutorial series with videos and PDFs, and another functioning game directly walking you through the process of using Wise. Works on Mac. So these are all really great tools to kind of just dive into it a little bit more. All right. So those are the main things that I wanted to point out, was to download the Wise launcher and then ultimately get a 2016 version to make everything work properly. All right. So That is where we will kind of or what we will discuss in the second half of class today. I'll switch it over to the archive, which will discuss your setup of 2D platformer using Wise and Angry Bots. So by the end of this week, you will have two fully working, two like functioning games with your music and sound effects in them. It will probably reveal some updates and tweaks and changes that you might need to do with your music or sound effects. You can, you will go be able to go back to your Logic session, go back to your music session, your sound effects session, make any changes, bounce out the files again, and put them back in when you can set everything up in Wise, get it all the way to the point where it's working in the game, realize that you need to make changes, and as long as you name the files the exact same way, format them the same way, when you re-import them into Wise, it will just replace the audio file, and you won't have to do any of the setup after that. It'll, as long as you do it once, you get everything working in the game the first time, then you can go back and kind of iterate and do those tweaks as many times as you need to, just dumping in the same file so it just replaces the original one. You can get the game and the Wise open at the same time, connected, so that you can test things out, make changes in real time, adjust volume, and all sorts of stuff. So, again, it's a bit more of a technical process. So if you run into any sort of issues, reach out and we can work through all of that. So you'll have two working games. You'll have 2D platformer and Angry Bots. Last week you worked on the composition for Angry Bots, so we have a couple of submissions. Where is Logic? Here we go. We have 5 submissions here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For the Angry Bots game composition. These were the final deliveries, but I pulled them from the submissions on the discussion post for week 2. This is certainly a different approach to the this type of composition. A different, certainly a reason that it is the second composition for the month. It's a bit more of a puzzle, trying to make everything fit together, and again, when you get everything in the game, it will probably reveal other changes or tweaks that need to be made. So we'll take a listen to the 5 submissions that we have. This week, everything is stacked vertically. This is what we mean by a vertical approach or a vertical composition. We have well, let's do it this way. Everybody has their own markers. You can see the last names up here, so you can, if you have submitted for the peer review, you can see your name there, see which column is yours. We have the ambient cue, the buzzer action cue, the mech action cue, and the spider action cue. Then I also have the 3 stingers down here on a stinger track. I will be sort of playing the part of the computer, mixing everything together. Let's get these in here where you can sort of see them. I have my ambient fader, my buzzer action fader, mech action fader, and my spider action fader. And I will be mixing the levels in and out. We'll listen to them one at a time, or we'll listen to them with the ambient cue, because in the game, the ambient cue is going to be playing consistently throughout the game. And then as the different robots attack, the particular or the corresponding action cues will be added and subtracted. You ultimately have control of the mix in Wise. Let's say this, your best mixing tools, your best metering tools are in Logic, and you are best served if you can just bring the faders up to Unity in Wise and get the perfect mix that you're looking for. but ultimately you do have the ability of changing the mix in Wise. If you just need to tweak things a little bit up or a little bit down, you don't want to have to go all the way back around and bounce things out again and put them back in Wise. You do have the opportunity for faders and raise and lower the volume. The mixing, well, not the mixing, but the metering and the control of the faders are a little bit better, you have less control overall in Wise. They're not as precise overall, but you do have access to those. And then ultimately how quickly they fade in and fade out, how long it takes to add and subtract the action cues. Typically when the battle starts, they'll come in almost immediately, and then when a particular robot is destroyed, they'll take quite a long time to fade out. So I will bring these up in different combinations. Ultimately, I will bring up all 4 faders, and we'll listen to the overall mix. You want to make sure that when everything is set to Unity, you're not completely destroying the master or the output. Sometimes it might sound just fine inside your production session in the DAW, and when you bounce things out individually, the sum of each one of them becomes greater than the overall mix that you had in the original session. So let's talk about the composition itself, the setup and the format of everything. We'll just kind of visually take a look at each one of these to see what we have, and then we'll go through them one by one. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, you can post them up in the chat. And all right, so this is your Angry Bots composition, the second composition of the month. A bit more kind of moving parts in here to make sure everything works together. The reason let's start with this. The main focus is 2 different game states, 2 different points of action or the lack of action. We have ambient and action. We have, if nothing else is going on in the game and you are not fighting a robot at a particular time, you are just hearing this ambient cue. It is a cue that is 1 to 2 minutes long. It is set up to loop. That means that the end of the cue has to return back to the top, and ultimately all 4 of these have to return back to the top with no pops or glitches, consistency, as it loops around. Sometimes the whole instrumentation, the whole orchestra, the band just stops and starts all over again. So we want it to be as seamless as possible as it loops around. And ultimately, if you have issues with each one of them, when all 4 of them are playing, or 3 or 2 in combination, it ultimately amplifies the problem. So the only reason this system works is because they all start at the same time, they all end at the same time, and they are meant to play together. No audio at this moment, but they are going to start at the same time, end at the same time. They need to be at the same tempo and the same time signature, or they will rhythmically clash. They need to be in the same key, the same following a similar chord progression, or else there will be dissonance and the individual layers will clash. So we want to make sure that individually a particular cue makes sense on its own, but as you bring them in all together, each portion will work with all of the other cues. You have to make sure that there is no repeated instrumentation. Sorry about that. You have to make sure that any instrumentation is unique to a particular cue. If you have a bass line or a hi-hat or a particular string line that is repeated in multiple cues, then it will double and triple as it plays back, as it layers and layers and layers in each one. So hopefully you took the opportunity to lay out your tracks somewhat like this and play them together, because this is ultimately how it's going to play back in the game. So unique instrumentation for each cue. There needs to be a similar progression for all of them. They're all following a common progression so that they make sense as it moves through time. You can have different elements of a chord added. So you don't need to reveal the entire chord progression in every single cue. You can use combinations of first, thirds, fifths, and even sevenths if needed, as it reveals in different combinations between the cues. You can stack kicks and snares and other percussion on different rhythmic values to create different combinations. And ultimately, you're kind of finding pockets for notes and instruments to work against each other. So certain elements or instruments or chord changes or melodic lines can work on a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, eighth note, 16th, and however you subdivide the rhythm overall. So it's about making sure they all fit together. There is enough instrumentation individually that they're not sparse and kind of boring on their own. But it's not so rhythmically dense that as you stack all of them, it just becomes an overdriven kind of distorted mess. The other thing that we're looking for is a strong difference between ambient and action. I can see this between these two submissions. It looks like the waveform and the strength and the intensity of this waveform is louder, or there's more in the ambient cue than each one of these action cues, versus the strength and the difference between this ambient cue versus these action cues. We want to make sure that the action cues create the action. You're being kind of chased and battling with these robots. They're firing missiles and explosions, and there's all sorts of battles going on. And so you want to make sure that the intensity, the energy is there when each one of these when each one of these action cues are added. So you don't want to have too much stuff thrown into the ambient cue that there's not room for what comes later on in the action cues. The stingers are, these are good sort of shapes overall. The waveform, you have a strong impact and it goes to silence very quickly. I'm kind of zoom in on this. So you want to make sure that it reaches silence, and it typically comes in two parts with a strong impact, a low end, a hit, and then some interesting flourish or effect, or what I typically call just kind of musical ear candy on the top that will play right against that impact. So these look like the good shape overall. These I noticed there's just a huge bit of silence on the end of each one of these. Oops. So we'll do that. You want to make sure that they are strong enough and powerful enough that they will can be heard against whatever's going on up here in the action cues. So those are the types of things that we are listening for. Let's go ahead. I'm sure I'll find more stuff to talk about as we go. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me make sure I can fit all of this stuff on the screen. And we will start out with just the ambient cue here. I can get my headphones. All right, let's see. Level. This one. All right, so I am going to guess already that there is too much stuff going on in the ambient compared to the action cues. Alright, so we have guitars for each one of these guitars. Alright, different tones. Alright, so we have basically the rhythm section, bass and drums down here, and like a pad, and then the guitars in each one. And then there's like a kind of synth line. All right. Overall, the intensity and the groove, once one of these action cues comes in, I think that really will reflect the action of the game nicely. One concern is going to be the difference, being able to identify the different robots as they come after you. Same line. Alright, it's like guitar 1 and guitar 2. Different tones. Let's take this out. Alright, yeah, so you're going to need a more separation between these two cues. Let's see what happens when we get here. Alright, so we got like a wah on there. Alright, so I like all of the elements. I think you're going to need to create more variation. It works well when they're all playing together because they're just layers of different guitar tones overall with some other instruments in there. I would think that you should separate some of this instrumentation out to the other action cues so that the drums really just come in with the guitars and with the rest of with the rest of the action. So here you could probably keep the bass, you can keep that drone pad in the background, maybe some hi-hat or some percussive, not really drums, but a hi-hat, or I don't know if it's just the crashes, but maybe just some cymbal hi-hat in here to kind of foreshadow the pulse. Put most of the kick and snare, or layer your kick and snares between the action cues. I think you can get away with more layered percussion than you can with layered guitar, because the layered guitar will sum up to one guitar line, versus the drums you can add different rhythmic values or different rhythmic combinations in the different action cues to ultimately build up to the kind of rhythm that you have here, or even with a couple of other layers. So maybe some big toms, or just on the bar, or then there's the hi-hat or the ride, like you're switching between ride and hi-hats and crashes. So you could take some of those elements and spread them out across the action cues. Then in the action, this is fine for the first one, but you're going to want to create some more variation between them. So create a different guitar line, keep the same change in the tone, but even there is some change between them, but maybe a lead line in there will help, a completely different delayed line, or something that has more development between them so that it becomes more identifiable as to what robot is coming after you. Because once they're layered together, it sounds like it's just meant as one guitar line. The other synths definitely help. You could push those forward. Then with the addition of the change in the percussion, I think that would create the needed variation overall. Let's bring them all in together and see what that sounds like. Alright, so a mix overall works out very well. Again, when it all combines together, works nicely, doesn't overload the master. So functionally everything works. Yeah, I think it's just creating more kind of individual nature of the buzzer versus mech versus spider. Right, let's do stingers now. This in here. So you want to watch out for things that are kind of pitched, because you're not sure exactly where that's going to hit and where well, I guess if you're sitting on the same sort of chord and chugging away on that, well, they're all tuned the same, all hitting that same kind of seventh field, but that not going to work against this. Yeah, so something with less tonality, a bit more of an impact also. I do like the fact that they are kind of higher pitched. These two sound more like just an individual chord or preset change. But having a good solid impact, low end also will help these. Also maybe extending them out a little bit longer with more reverb or delay. Those would be the main things that I'm hearing here. I think the main thing would be to separate out the percussion from this ambient cue through the other action cues and separating that guitar. But the guitar line in general works out very well for the action and the intensity of this particular game. So all of that works well. All right, so we have ambient, 3 action cues. I think we should be ready to go. Let's go ahead and try the next one here. Alright, so we have a really cool kind of texture overall. I am hearing some this kind of good stereo imaging. I would say that about halfway through here, or maybe even a third of the way through, I've generally heard most of what it's going to do. So adding another layer that comes in and out over time just to create more of that variation. I do hear some what feels like kind of crossfading between different elements, which works, but that becomes established. And yeah, it could just use a bit more development over time, but otherwise it kind of creates a good foundation. Alright, let me let's just listen to this by itself for a bit. So we got kind of these string kind of plucks in there. Some some low percussion. All right. I would make sure that you have a hit at the very start here, which will help as it loops around. I do feel like it needs a little bit of bottom end. Maybe that kind of comes a little bit later in the other cues. I would say that those plucks are kind of loud since they are repeating. Would kind of lean more into the swelling strings and the impacts. Then the other thing would be, as this develops over time, I like more of this action earlier on. So we kind of get more action here. The drums come in a bit more. Where does it go? So I would have this intensity earlier on and develop and make that part longer. I wouldn't sit on this intensity for what's almost half of the cue, because you want to create that level of intensity, that sort of that amount of action earlier and more consistently. So if I could, I don't know how is there a way to, some combination, oops, that allows me to drag it. But if I did this, that's not really going to do it either. But maybe put this as the start of the cue, and then have it build up through this intensity, then goes into this intensity, plays through this twice as long, and then steps back down to this, and then steps back down here. I think you'll have a more appropriate intensity, sort of action velocity through these cues. Let's do the spider cue. Alright, so the thing that I notice with the ambient cue is that it creates too much atonality and clashes against what's going on. There's a lot more clarity. There's a lot more clarity with this playing by itself. Once the ambient cue is added, just kind of adds too much dissonance. Same thing here. Alright, so I'm probably, just looking at the waveforms, going to say the same thing for the spider cue, because that sounded really cool. When I was going from here, right, at this intensity, and then I get into this, but when it loops, both of these, the intensity is going to go down too far. So that would be the main thing, because what's happening within there is really quite solid. There's just cool stuff happening with the rhythm. And the overall groove that's created here. All right, let's keep going. All right, so a bit too much of the da 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 kind of might create sort of this kind of offset counterpoint groove. to just kind of parallel themselves a little too much. All right. Again, let's jump over here. I think in each one of these, the main thing with the mix is to add a lower, something in a lower register. Maybe it just needs to be a sub or some low bass that is hitting the root notes and fills in. Then you're going to have to balance them if all three of them have it. So you might consider where they're laid out. That might be a little tough overall. But think about something in a lower register. I honestly did not put that in there. Yeah, so that would be the only thing mix-wise, because a lot of the hits definitely do the impact. I would, the main thing is staying kind of away from this lower intensity, balancing it out where it's at the higher intensity a bit longer in each one of these cues. This ambient cue sounds great by itself, but I do feel that there is a bit too much sort of atonality dissonance. Not that it's going to be hard, because we're going to hear other things that are atonal and work perfectly well. But there's just some sort of dissonance that clashes with whatever else is going on here. The other thing that you can do in Wise is just whenever these action cues are playing, have it pull down the ambient if you want, and then have it fade back in when these fade out. Kind of a ducking situation. But I was afraid of it going too drum heavy. Yeah, I think, well, let's see. I didn't actually play them all together. Let's go, jump over here. The mix does feel very mid-rangey, very intense at that sort of frequency range. We could pull back, and then, boosting up the low end will add some warmth. But rhythmically, I think it all works quite well, because most of it, the sort of interesting stuff is in the swells and as things get pulled in and out. There is definitely a challenge over here when all of this stuff is going. And balancing that stuff out. So overall, you definitely have good elements to work with. It'll be definitely interesting to hear it in the context of the game. The other thing to point out is, it will sound different in the game because of how you're not really sitting in the action all that long. The actions come in and out relatively quickly, even though we set it up to fade out over 20 seconds. It really kind of weaves in and out quite quickly, and that might affect your approach in the composition. All right, let's try 3. In the game, it sounded really cool, but the layers need to be fuller frequency-wise. Yeah. Absolutely. And then the other thing is that also depends on your sound effects. If your sound effects have a whole bunch of low end, like all of your explosions and gunfire is just sub low bass, then maybe that's okay. But it is paying attention to the combination of all of that. All right, let's do 3 stingers. Cool. Oops. They sound very good. They work well. The only thing is they do sound like they fade out a bit too quickly. So if the assignment says 1 to 3 seconds, and I don't know if these are 3 seconds long. 2, Yeah, it could be pretty close. So, yeah, if you need a little bit longer to just have the reverb and the tail fade out, this one sounds a little, again, too high end, needs some low frequency. This one works well. But I think it just fades. I just hear the fade a little too clearly. That one almost sounds like a sound effect, like an explosion in a bass drum, or yeah, bass drum. But overall, I think they work. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of compete with the rest of the music. All right. Very good. Let's go ahead and try out the next one here. Overall, now, again, if we, everything we talked about, everything is looping properly. There is no clashing in frequency-wise. There's no clashing between the different compositional, melodic, and harmonic layers. So everything's kind of fitting together and will play back properly in the game. It'll just be a question of, is it aesthetically working? How's the mix? How does it play against the sound effects? So again, all of these things are a good place overall to be good ideas to be discussing once you get over the hurdle of making everything generally work and play back and function in the game. All right, let's try another ambient cue. So, I think the challenge here is really having that guitar riff repeating over and over again. This being in the ambient cue, it will just play and like through the entire game. So it's going to create way too much repetition, and even beyond that, there is no development even either in that phrase or any of the rest of the instrumentation. So. Definitely watch out for that repetition. Let's see what happens in each one. All right, watch out for, again, the repeated instrumentation. Having that sort of white noise drop sweep thing is also present here. So it is going to create, it's going to double things up. Also, is that the organ? Yeah, the organ will be doubled up. All right, so the main thing we're missing is drums. We need the action part of the action. We need the percussion, we need the rhythm, we need the intensity. Watch out, because once we layer everything together, most of what you hear is kind of the noise effects, the pitch drops overall. So create more variation between the different cues. Do not use any repeated instrumentation. Watch out for the repeating phrase in the original ambient cue. Just create more layers of more instrumentation, more density overall, and create more instrumentation that layers up vertically, and then more development compositionally, which changes over time. That will allow these to kind of come in and out and create all of the variation that you need for the game. Three stingers. Make sure it doesn't get cut off. You could definitely let that sort of delay or decay through the rest of the cue. Right, these mostly sound like kind of synth notes. These might be good as layers, although this one's almost like a little phrase. Definitely needs the impact and the hit. Something like, let me go steal another one over here. Or was that one? This one? No. There's the middle one. I think this. I don't know how well this will work, but it's the idea that you have this low end impact and hit. And then some sort of ear candy, filter, sweep, delay, reverb, just all sorts of kind of stuff. And you wouldn't want to just copy the same one in each one, but see that? Cool, that was work. Yeah. Just to put across the idea that it's a layered sound, something with low end, something that's going to have that impact that breaks through the rest of the mix, instead of just like these single high synthy notes. All right. Let's go ahead and listen to the next one here. So here, the main thing is at least the visual difference in the intensity between the spider and the mech. Seems like when the mech comes in, the spider's just going to disappear. Maybe even the ambient cue would disappear too. So progression is strong. I like the little pulse that's set up from the hi-hat. The ambient cue works out well to create the foundation of the rest of the cues. There's constant sort of movement forward. Now the only thing would be maybe the instrumentation is, while the progression develops, the instrumentation's pretty much the same all the way throughout. Again, having another layer that comes in and out, maybe just a big long filter sweep, a pad, a really slow evolving pad to play against that pulse. Let's see what the buzzer is. All right, that lead synth line does a little piercing, kind of cuts through. Works there. All right. Overall, now I would say maybe feels a little bit too major overall. This feels like oh, there it goes. Kind of changes to a different tonality, but overall this feels like I've kind of won already. This is when the credits are scrolling and like it says good job, you defeated the game. Like the major feel very kind of dramatic overall. Instrumentation works. I like the lead line, so I would just kind of consider that element to it, creating a little bit more of that aggressiveness and intensity since you're battling the robots. Alright, let's bring in the spider cue. Alright, so here's the problem with the volume of the spider cue, is as I bring this in and out, I really can't hear any change. Alright, there's some strings in there, so if I bring this up and take this out. Alright, so you can just boost up all that string section. Would include a bit of percussion. Oh, we got a gong there. It's almost like, with the intensity, it's like a waltz with the spider bot instead of a like cutthroat action scene. So watch out for, you just visually see the intensity difference. Let's go ahead and see what the mech has. All right, there's the epicness. All right, so production-wise, everything works well. I like the strong swings. I like the strong strings. I like the brass swells. The timpani leaves a lot of room for stuff like this over here. Like these work well together. But again, if you do this, you can't really hear what's going on in the spider cue. So, everything fits well together. Everything's going to loop nicely in the game. The buzzer and the mech play against each other well. The difference in the instrumentation. One thing I can probably see is if I bring these up and bring this towards 0, watch the overall. Alright, so it stays right underneath, doesn't clip, and I can bet if I bring... Excellent. So we want to make sure that that doesn't overload. So everything fits. The production of each cue is well done. There is a concern for the spider action as to how that's going to compete with the rest of the cues. Really, my only comment is the epicness and the major positive feel of this particular cue, or the progression, really. And feels almost like I've won, or maybe it could be like all hope is lost, and then it goes to the slow motion montage scene where there's nothing but like it plays the difference between strong kind of this winning heroic music and massive destruction in slow motion on the screen. I don't know, but consider the aesthetic, consider the thematic feel of the music against the kind of action in the game. Oh yeah, there's the ambient too. Those probably work well together. Let's do this. Yeah, it's sort of like ambient and spider versus buzzer and mech. And mixing. Oh, watch that gong on the loop. Want to make sure that doesn't get cut off at the end. All right, so again, production and functionality, it's going to work well in the game. It'll be interesting to see how kind of it plays in the context of the game. 3 stingers. Right, I think maybe a little bit more impact. This one is going to work. It's got the kind of splash to it that'll cut through. This, I feel, would get lost just frequency-wise. Maybe that same thing there, too. What happens if I do, like... And this one still kind of dominates. Oh, that's probably because I have the fader down. How about this? And... it still kind of dominates. So yeah, watch the frequency. I would have like something with a strong attack, strong kind of punch at the front. Maybe that will help. Maybe it's volume. Maybe it's adding layers in a higher frequency. But we want to make sure that those will compete against, especially the intensity of this. All right, another good example. Let's try. Oh, I see what I did. I moved these, and I didn't move my markers. Okay. One more to try. Ambient. Gradient B&Q feels very stealthy. Feels like early Metal Gear or something like that. I'm creeping around. Now the only thing is pretty consistent once it's been established, although there was a cool kind of sweep in there earlier. Ooh, watch out for that loop. Where was that? Maybe it was just... Oh, it was that. It was just it played less frequently. Yeah, so maybe adding some another instrument, just another sweep that takes quite a while overall. All right, let's do buzzer. So we got the strings. Isn't there like a synth kind of pad swell in there? Yeah, that. Okay. So the thing with the here with the strings is the velocity. Dun 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 dun. We do have. Is it the same? No, it's a different hi-hat. So we do have the hi-hat in here, which helps bring a little bit of a different rhythm in. I would add maybe bigger drums, just that hits every once in a while. Doesn't need to be consistent throughout. Ooh. Yeah, I would lay into that synth a little bit more to create, because the strings are too robotic. Same velocity all the way through, sort of a predictable pattern and know where they're going to go. So that synth creates a little bit more of that natural variation. Yeah, and a little bit more strength from some more percussion. Let's see what these other cues bring in. All right, I like the arpeggiator. Still looking for bigger drums, which I think are going to come in the mech, hopefully. All right, I like the arpeggiator works. It's still kind of different hi-hat, lighter, kind of higher percussion. Let's see what happens here. All right, so now we have kind of kick and snare, but I'd still say that you can, if you're going to have that rhythm, this sort of halftime, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, like this snare on the 3, but you can still have room in another cue for a kick snare or some percussion combination that is like a kind of 2-4 combination. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2. Just to have a little bit more room, because otherwise you're sitting on the like the 8th note, some 16th note stuff. All right, texturally everything works well, everything fits together nicely, follows that common progression. I'd still say bigger drums at some point, or in different pockets of the different action cues, because overall the pace still feels at 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, kind of sitting there. When some layers, or by the time you get everything connected, mixed and layered together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, like this sort of double time kind of feel. This composition as a whole works very well with halftime, double time combinations, basically to create pockets overall for the overall composition. All right. Here, also notice the velocity of my cello is super dry. Yeah, the arpeggiator is using a random feature with variation so it doesn't get too stale. Cool. Nice. I love random kind of stuff. Even just to play around with it and go back and edit through the best parts. All right, let's do 3 stingers. Whoa. Cool. Yep. Yeah, these long tails will definitely help. Kind of, you'll have the strong impact, and then it'll linger around a little bit. Yeah, I think all of those work. They're appropriately strong and powerful enough. They should kind of cut through. Let's just listen to these. Throw them randomly in here. Oh, not. Come on. Yeah. So, overall, I think everything fits well. I think you have a good materials to work with. I would say the main thing is, with all of these submissions, you have all of the working parts, the moving parts. Can put it in the game, test it out, and then make some idea or create some ideas for changes and tweaks that you might need in the backend logic. So you get into the game, you test it out, you play through a couple of times, then you go back to logic, make any changes that you need to, bounce those out, dump them into the game, test them out again, and then just keep doing it until you refine. Now, I mean, probably it's not going to be doing that endlessly, but in a professional sense, that is definitely what happens, and you actually have the opportunity to test it out directly in the game to see how it's all going to work. So I hope this gives everybody a good idea and a solid approach of how this composition works. Again, I feel that everybody has their own thoughts and ideas and approach for the composition, and as you're working on before the deadline, you're making a solid guess at it. But once you get it into the game, once we do a bit of this peer review, it kind of opens up a whole lot more ideas and changes and things not to try and things to definitely try. I would definitely get things working in the game even before you might do your first revision, just so that you can just take notes and see how things work. See certain things. I will say that going through everything in Logic, we are going through it with using a microscope in a way that won't be necessarily the same or even as much of an issue once it goes into the game. With the game, once everything's working, you have the music working with the sound effects, working with the graphics, plus the actual gameplay. A lot of people are focused enough on the games. They're enjoying the graphics. The music and sound effects, a lot of this stuff gets glossed over. It's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts kind of idea, where we can look through it and just listen to the music and pick apart details and things that may not be that much of an issue when you got everything working together in the game. So make sure definitely you test it out. It will probably reveal things that you might want to change. And again, you have the opportunity to work on it all the way through the end of next week when you turn in the final version of everything. So let's wrap it up here with the peer review. Again, thanks for everybody for the submissions. We have another opportunity to do this one more time with the chiptune compositions that you have coming up this week. We'll turn it over to the archive now, which will discuss how you will set up Wise with 2D Platformer and Angry Bots. Again, jump onto it as soon as you can. To run into any sort of technical issues, reach out to me. I'll be around on Thursday If you are experiencing anything in Wise, we can load it up and work our way through that. Come armed with questions, come armed with music, any of that stuff, and we will take a listen to it. So let's go ahead and switch it over to the archive with a discussion about Wise. I'll stick around for a few minutes after class. Otherwise, have a good afternoon. Thanks. Week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016. And my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go... Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D Platformer Wise setup and AngryBots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D Platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So There's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There's a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the WISE project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this Media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch WISE and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other, and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise, and then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double-click that, and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the soundbanks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. you have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor Mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here. We are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together, and we are going to do the same thing here. we are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist, Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play it one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, play, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all 3 of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that the application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit file save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. we have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right. So when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects. Bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine. So we're going to hit import. I'll just go to project save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compresses all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy Death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And Taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So I'm going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX Enemy Death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this Jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX Ouch. And the last one here is SFX Taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse. And this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. Gunshot. Health pickup. Browse. Health pickup. Jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container, taunt. Select taunt random container. All right, now I have messages. Seem to work. All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit generate. And when you hit generate, this message will pop up, and it says evaluation mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents. Resources. Now, you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this, and you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get in contact with us, and your instructor can help you out. So, what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely Wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so this there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about 1 minute long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they are very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. Well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track, and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, eighth notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition. and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, and other than that, have a good day. Thanks.